Welcome to In the Garden with Laura. I am Laura O'Callahan, and as a master gardener and editor of the website In the Garden with Laura, I would like to share with you my passion for native plants. I will also discuss ideas for creating native gardens that support wildlife. Shown here is a red admiral butterfly sipping nectar from an aster. Here is the overview of today's talk. I will provide an overview of native plants, discuss why they are critical to our ecosystem, highlight issues to consider in plant selection, and discuss how to incorporate them in your garden. What is a native plant? This is the most commonly accepted definition. Natives occur where they evolved without Europeans having genetically changed them. They evolved along with the insects that pollinate them over hundreds or thousands of years ago. They should be referred to by the region in which they are found, like the Piedmont region. The white turtlehead plant, for example, and the Baltimore checkerspot butterfly show how two species evolved together. The white turtlehead is the primary plant on which the butterfly lays its eggs. They are both found in wet meadowlands and ditches. The butterfly is imperiled in Maryland. A couple quick definitions. Herbaceous plants have vascular systems. They include annuals, perennials, and biennials. These examples would be flowering plants, ferns, and grasses, as well as sedges. The term herbaceous, however, is typically used for perennials. They store nutrients underground during the winter, including roots, bulbs, and tubers. Woody plants, on the other hand, are perennials with a woody framework. They can be deciduous, semi-evergreen, or evergreen. Native plants are an essential element in the web of life. Native plants are a food source for pollinators, plant-eating insects, and animals. Flies in early spring become food for early spring birds, says entomologist and University of Delaware professor Doug Tallamy. The timing is orchestrated perfectly. It is not a coincidence that the local native plants have seeds and berries ready just when the birds need them, he added. Remove a native from the landscape, you may remove the insect that feeds on it, which may eradicate the bird that feeds on that insect. Wildlife and ecosystems depend on native plants. Native plants are adapted to the local climate and social conditions. They provide food, shelter, and nesting sites for butterflies and other insects, birds, and wildlife. Non-native plants often do not provide any or the same quality of food. Non-native shrubs often are not as good nesting sites for wildlife. Some are too weak to support a nest, with catastrophic results. Local wildlife is dependent on natives. In Maryland, there are 150 native butterflies, 400 native bees, and 450 species of birds have been sighted here. Over half of these have nested here. Natives have attributes that benefit the environment in many ways. Ornamental grasses, sedges, and swamp milkweed help reduce erosion, for example. The more that we can replace lawn with gardens, meadows, and forests of native plants, the better. To paraphrase Dr. Tallamy, as open space disappears, we must look at our own landscapes as a refuge for biodiversity. Survival of natives and wildlife are intertwined. Native plants and wildlife are interdependent. Species tend to be a better food source for pollinators. Some insects need a specific plant to survive. For example, monarchs require milkweed as a host plant. We need these insects and other wildlife too. Insects, birds, and others pollinate 35% of the food we eat. They pollinate 80% of flowering plants. Insects are key food sources for birds and wildlife. Can we avoid disaster? Declines in native plants, insects, and birds are raising major alarms. The global insect demise began early in the 20th century, accelerated in the 50s and 60s. There has been an overall decline of nearly 77% of insects in the past 27 years in Germany. Reports of an ongoing bird Armageddon that mirrors the insect apocalypse suggest that insect-eating birds have been collateral damage in the collapse of insect populations worldwide. The loss of a species can escalate to affect an entire ecosystem. Consider it a game of Jenga. How many pieces of the ecosystem can be removed before it, and the earth we depend on, collapses? Planting the seeds of change. I am not hopeless. Together we can make a difference. We need to consider what we are growing. If you plant a native plant, how much have people cultivated it? You have to consider these issues. The more changes that are made to a species, the more likely it will lose some value to pollinators, says Dr. Annie White, University of Vermont. Therefore, if considering native cultivars for use in a pollinator garden, open pollinated seed-grown selections or sports, naturally occurring mutations, are the best choices. Cultivars that differ significantly in color and morphology from the native species should be used cautiously. Morphology means roots, stems, leaves, flowers, and fruits of a plant. For example, since miniature plants produce fewer flowers and berries, they may be less appealing to pollinators. Of 4 traits studied by Dr. Tallamy, only one consistently deterred insect eating: green leaves that were changed to red, purple, or blue. Red leaves remove chlorophyll from the leaf and load it with anthocyanins, which are feeding deterrents. So while we can make a difference, we have to do it with the right plants. It is also important to consider the insect. A plant can attract 500 European honeybees and not help plants at all, said Dr. Tallamy. Species have ancient roots. Planting species or varieties preserves the original gene pool of these plants, but it can be difficult to find species and varieties. Many nurseries sell cultivars or hybrids. To see which species are available and which cultivars are good for pollinators, look at the work of Mount Cuba Research Center in Delaware. Visit reputable native nurseries. Cultivars and hybrids do not create true-to-seed plants. So if you want to reproduce your own plants in your garden, you want to purchase species and varieties. They produce identical offspring. One unusual example of a variety is the white redbud, shown here. It is a natural mutant of the redbud that was discovered in the wild in a forest in Iowa. What's on a label? Not all nurseries label their plants completely or correctly, but these words will help you know what you are purchasing. Shop at a local store you trust that provides detailed information and sells only or mostly natives. Among the nurseries that sell natives in this area of Carroll County: Herring Run Nursery in Baltimore City, Wakefield Valley in New Windsor, Carroll County, Chesapeake Natives in Upper Marlboro. White's Azalea Nursery has a large selection of non-native azaleas, but they also have a big selection of native azaleas, just beautiful ones, from the East Coast and from Maryland, as well as a lot of cultivars. Azaleas mix quickly, and people have been interbreeding azaleas for a long time. There is a distinct difference between the native, East Coast native, and the Asian azaleas. East Coast azaleas are absolutely stunning in their colors and their delicacy. Schatz Nursery, it's a wholesale nursery in Tawnytown, Carroll County, but on Saturdays it's open to retail, very reasonable prices. And Lauren's Garden Service and Native Plant Nursery in Glenwood. These are just a few of the places. There are also a number of places in Pennsylvania. To find a nursery that grows plants locally, 10 to 50 miles away from where you live, is best. There are also many plant sales in the spring, and you can look at the Mount Cuba Research Center website for other locations. https mountcubacenter.org. Invasives come from other countries and regions in the United States. They cause great harm and have few or no natural enemies. They can spread rapidly and outcompete natives for key resources like sunlight, water, nutrients, soil, and space. They displace and alter native plant communities. They give little or no food or habitat to wildlife. Why do invasives spread so fast? Because they produce a large quantity of seeds, they thrive in disturbed soil, and the seeds are spread by birds. Invasives have been the cause of an 18% decline in endangered or threatened native species. They have contributed to a 42% decline of endangered or threatened species. Invasives compete with natives, and they often win. Invasives reduce plant diversity, degrade wildlife habitat, and many aggressive invasives are highly self-sufficient and need no help in establishing themselves and spreading. Locals versus exotics. I start with the butterfly bush because people think that it is such a good plant. It's not one of the worst invasives, but it is an invasive. It outcompetes natives. It's an ineffective host plant for butterflies because the nectar of the exotic butterfly bush attracts pollinators at only one stage of their life cycle. And it is a host plant, I believe, for only one butterfly. Other plants are host plants for a number of butterflies. They will spread in bushes, in forests. It's just not the plant to put in your garden. Japanese barberry, on the other hand, is even a worse plant to put in your garden. It spreads into the woods, and it will create huge areas of growth of barberry plants. Deer won't eat them. They outcompete native plants. It attracts deer ticks, which carry Lyme disease. The seeds are spread by birds, and they are incredibly hard to get rid of them. I am in the middle of a 2-year campaign, which will last much longer than that, to rid my woods of barberry bushes. And I was just stunned to see how many had cropped up this year from just a pathway that I had thought I had removed them last year. Just don't ever dream of planting them. They're a terrible plant. And perhaps an even worse plant is the non-native tree of heaven. And the reason why this is so bad is it's a host plant for the dreaded spotted lanternfly. If you have a tree of heaven, remove it to reduce the chance of attracting the spotted lanternfly. It has been seen in Pennsylvania. It's all over Pennsylvania. We're trying to keep it from getting into Maryland. The fly feeds on sap from over 70 different plant species, including grapevines, maple, black walnut, birch, willow, and other trees. So it just decimates plants. Native insects and diseases, while harmful, do not wipe out native plants that they attack, whereas foreign plants will completely destroy. If you look at the history of the chestnut tree and the elm tree, I mean, we are still trying to genetically regrow those plants so that they can survive. So don't mess with the exotic trees. They really can create horrible side effects. English ivy is another example. Once it gets off the ground and it gets up in trees, it can do great damage, can kill trees. It's very hard to get out of trees. Invasives are sort of the gardener's bane. Small but deadly. Here's the other sad part of gardening. These exotic insects and diseases can affect any garden. Asian and European insects and fungi can decimate American native trees and plants. Our trees and plants don't have the defenses that they have developed to deal with native insects and fungi over the centuries. One example, eggs of the Asian gypsy moth, one of the world's most destructive insects, have been found on ships in Baltimore's port recently. Not only do we need to remove invasive plants, but we need to control or eliminate as many non-native insects and fungi as possible. It is a two-way street. Foreign plants have been attacked by American insects and fungi as well. How to create a native haven despite these dangers? You can make a difference. Create a sanctuary for native plants, butterflies, bees, and other insects, birds, and wildlife. Try purchasing a flat or plug of phlox or other perennials to make masses of color in your garden. Need ideas? Visit Mount Cuba online and other online resources. There are also books that feature natives from the Piedmont Garden. If you go to Mount Cuba, you can walk through their gardens online and see the layout of the gardens. How to grow a wildlife haven. To paraphrase Dr. Talamy, as open space disappears, we make our landscapes a refuge for biodiversity. Native organisms, from plants to birds and mammals, are all part of this intricate web of life, and we all need one another. Create a home for an entire ecosystem. Grow plants, shrubs, and trees native to the Piedmont region. Avoid pesticides. Most bad insects will be taken care of by the good ones. 80% of insects, with the exception of non-native ones, are good. So you really don't have to try to eliminate all insects from your garden. That's just a fallacy. Different plants have different values to wildlife. Aggressive natives are highly desirable, but they need to be given the right space, and that is a lot of space. That includes goldenrod, mountain mint, golden Alexander. These are great plants for bees, butterflies, and other wildlife, but they will beat up your delicate little plants if you put them right next to them. If you plant the natives, the wildlife will come. This picture appears in the foreground is from Mount Cuba, where they grow pitcher plants. Natives thrive in the right spot. You need to consider your audience. Pollinators, other wildlife, as well as yourself. Plant each species in quantity, not single plants. Don't wear out those poor bees and butterflies by making them fly around to find flowers. Plant native species and varieties that appeal to them. Plant the right place in plant in the right place. Have plants bloom from spring to fall, from golden Alexander to milkweeds, asters, mountain mint, and goldenrod. Create rain gardens if you have a problem with water runoff. Don't over-tidy your gardens. There could be butterflies sleeping in those leaves this fall, winter, and spring. What colors do pollinators like? Why does this matter? Some insects depend on one or two plants. You want to grow the plants that appeal to them. Monarchs are one such example. Their host plant is common milkweed. They are also fond of swamp milkweed and butterfly weed. The butterfly pollinates the plant. The monarch's caterpillar eats its leaves. Their populations have declined by 90% since the 1990s. Goldenrod is one of the best perennials for weeding wildlife as well. It does not cause allergies. Its pollen is too heavy. Ragweed is the plant that causes allergies. Researchers also think that monarchs like the nectar of goldenrod as well as asters too. Here are a few suggestions of plants to grow in your garden. Sun worshippers. Maryland's Piedmont region has hundreds of native trees, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, grasses, and sedges to choose from. Some benefit wildlife more than others, like oaks, goldenrod, mountain mint, milkweed, asters, but they are all an important part of the web of life and create a stunning addition to anyone's garden. Here are some shade-loving beauties. There are numerous ground covers and herbaceous plants that like shade less than 2 hours and part shade 2 to 4 hours. Violets, which grow in sun or shade, have a special role. They are a host plant for many fritillaries, a fast-flying type of butterfly. So I used to always pull mine out as if they were weeds till I read this and I was horrified that I'd done so. Now I let them grow in the garden. Here are a few other plants for shade or part shade. Appalachian sedge, ferns, spring beauty, squirrel corn, and wild bleeding heart. I would point out the black cohosh, the second down from the top right. That is a tall, 4 to 5 foot tall green plant that then shoots out these beautiful white cone-shaped flowers, and it is an absolute stunning plant for summer. It's a lovely plant, and it takes a little bit to get it going, but it then sort of self-seeds, and I now have several of them going in right next to my house. They're just a wonderful plant. And to the left of that, the pink and yellow plant is Indian pink, which I first saw at Mount Cuba. It is a gorgeous plant. It was hard to find someone selling it. I think I got it at Herring Run. And it took a bit to get it going, and I just love it. It's slow to sort of build up, but it is just a stunning summer, early fall blooming plant. Bluebells I have yet to get going. I planted one and the deer just pulled it up, so I lost it. But native shrubs for Piedmont gardens. Carolina allspice deer, it just has these little red buds on them, and the deer just don't touch it in my garden. I have this whole row of different shrubs as sort of a shielding or hedge between the neighbors and myself, and they just went after most of the plants, except for the holly, but they do not touch the Carolina allspice. And it suckers, which is great for me because I want to screen, so I'm happy to have it expand. It's about probably 5, 6 feet tall, 6 feet tall now. So that's definitely a great one if you have deer. There are numerous other shrubs to choose from. American witch hazel, wonderful little yellow in the fall, yellow blossom. Buttonbush has these pretty little white button or round balls in the early spring, and then incredibly gorgeous color leaves in the fall. Shrubby St. John's wort, Virginia sweetspire, another great plant, 3-season. There are just so many bushes. You have to figure the right one for your garden. Wildlife depends on woodies. Sometimes we forget the importance of shrubs and trees for wildlife. As a master gardener, I was taught that there were 2 types of trees, understory and or ornamental trees. The understory grow on the edge of the forest, or they can take full sun, like dogwoods and redbuds, and the tall trees. It is a convenient way to view trees. Tall trees, over 50 feet. So this was a very straightforward, way. But when I started studying this a little further, I found that tree classifications are messy. And what I was told isn't really the best definition. And that's because different types of trees have very little in common, according to England's Royal Forestry Society. Many plants are identified by traits that allow them to be categorized in families. Trees are an example of convergent evolution. This is when one or more unrelated living things adopt the same biological traits to solve similar problems. Trees evolved from unrelated plant families that developed a single woody stem to grow taller to get more light. So it would be as if you said, we have a fish and we have a rabbit and we had a frog. And they're totally unrelated, but they all grew up to be tall to get the light. So this kind of throws a whole new way of looking at trees. The Royal Forestry Society went on to say that there was a second way of classifying trees, and they divided them into 2 main biological classes. Those that have seeds spread by the wind like pine cones, and hardwoods like oaks and beeches that have flowers. These trees evolved alongside insects, birds, and mammals, and usually use them for pollination. There are often exceptions to these rules, however. But it gives you a little better understanding of why tree families, the way we look at trees doesn't quite fit in well. There are some great trees to choose from, and I've just got to pull out that the first tree you might want to consider planting is an oak. It supports more than 534 species of butterfly moths, caterpillars. That's just what they studied in terms of types of insects that it supported. And these caterpillars then support birds and whatnot who feed on them and feed their young on them. But it feeds more species of butterfly and moth caterpillars than any other tree or plant species. They are a crucial food source. It would kind of be like if you pulled out all the fruits and vegetables from the grocery store and said, you have to survive without these. They are just crucial for wildlife. Takeaways. Populations of native plants, birds, insects are in serious decline. Natives are key to biodiversity. They need havens for natives and wildlife to protect and build up their populations. Invasive plants and wildlife need to be removed. All gardens of whatever size benefit native plants and wildlife if they have a rich selection, a proper selection. It is up to all of us to create those havens. Here are some sources of books that I would recommend. Bringing Nature Home and Designing Gardens with Flora of the American East just totally changed my understanding of native plants and the importance of these plants. I would also highly recommend an online book that is also available for sale, Native Plants of the Northern Piedmont. Beautiful pictures, a whole list of native plants for this region. It's Virginia, but we're close to Virginia. They're in the Piedmont region. I'd also suggest going to the Mount Cuba Research Center. So good luck, garden on, and thanks for listening.